Right, so you are a resident or citizen of one of the countries neighboring South Africa that shares borders, land borders with the Republic. You went home prior to the lockdown, but now that the country is going into a level 3 and some businesses are opening up and schools and tertiary institutions are opening up, you either want to come back to work or run your business, or your children, for them to go to school or tertiary institutions in South Africa. But you've been wondering what sort of information applies to you from crossing the border into South Africa, from transportation from the border to where you're going, interprovincial travel, if that's what it requires, but also where can you stay and are you able to use temporary accommodation in the areas that you're going to, and what kind of accommodation is available for you. So what we've done is we've selected areas of bits and pieces that come out of the National Command Center, as well as ministries and departments that are affected by the changes in the level 3 lockdown that apply particularly to those of you who are coming from these countries, and they include Eswatini, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and others. So have a look at what applies to you as it comes out of the various departments of South Africa.
Our international ports of entry remain closed except for those designated by the Minister of Home Affairs to undertake the transportation of fuel and cargo for humanitarian operations, repatriation or evacuations of for medical emergencies, movements for international organizations that may be deemed important, but also South Africans still coming back home and foreigners leaving the country. And also those who may be coming back to study as the schools open, or coming back to work who work in South Africa but live in other neighboring countries.
So once you're inside the Republic, be aware that interprovincial travel is now allowed, but only for people who are going to work, learners going back to school, as well as people providing essential services. So no leisure travel is allowed, either inside of provinces or between provinces. The other areas in terms of the types of transportation that are available, bus transportation and taxi transportation is available between provinces and inside of provinces. However, rail transportation is not allowed. Domestic air travel is now allowed, but only from 3 airports currently. Others will come in at a later stage. Let's have a look.
Given that schools will open in a phased approach, there will also be open travel between provinces and districts for pupils, students and teachers. As we know, some of them live at the border of provinces and they have to commute pretty much every day.
On arrival, all passengers must be screened as they enter the terminal building. Suspected cases must be referred to Port Health. The reason why we've got the triangular approach, you must understand, of Joburg, Cape Town, and Kinshasa is because all the other smaller airports don't have the Port Health capacity. So to open them up without that capacity is a total disaster. They will be opened up as and when we roll that capacity out. And we do stress testing through these airports because there are questions that will arise. Cape Town is an epicenter, Johannesburg and Durban. Why do you allow this to happen and then you don't allow flying in smaller airports? This is guided also by capacity. Only passengers will be allowed inside the terminal buildings. Therefore, no accompanying members of the public will be allowed inside the terminal buildings. Just a point of emphasis, there's no need to go to airport to accompany anybody except if you drop off. Inside the cabin, full capacity will be allowed. It must be noted that the risk of COVID-19 infection on board a commercial passenger airline is lower than in many other confined spaces. All our commercial aircrafts are fitted with high efficiency particulate air filters. It's something that I had during this week for the first time. But to explain it to you, it HEPA, it eats all the viruses, not only corona, any virus inside the aircraft. HEPA, finito. So there is HEPA. So don't compare airlines with taxis. So that we can have 100%. Let's be clear. HEPA is for airlines. Okay? Taxis, mask, and all of that. While the total air supply inside the cabin is essentially sterile and particle-free, the biggest risk is if someone enters or remains in that environment while unwell with a viral infection. This risk will be mitigated through the adoption of effective sanitization and personal hygiene protocols. We have concluded that PRASA is not ready to resume with the Metro Rail commuter services. We continue to work closely with PRASA in assessing each line and put measures in place to achieve an acceptable level of readiness. We have therefore revised our timelines in respect of the resumption of the Metro Rail commuter service. The revised target date is now 1st July 2020 on the following lines: Pretoria to Pienaarspruit, Cape Town to Simonstown, East London to Berlin, and Port Elizabeth to Uitenhage. Long-distance public transport crossing provincial, metropolitan, or district boundaries is permitted to operate. The condition for such operation is that public transport vehicles are only permitted to transport persons permitted to travel between provinces in terms of the regulations. Such travel is only restricted to persons undertaking work responsibilities or performing a service permitted under Alert Level 3, provided they are in possession of the requisite permit. Persons moving to a new place of residence, persons caring for an immediate family member, learners or students who have to commute to and from those schools or institutions of higher learning during periods when those schools or institutions are permitted to operate. The time restrictions on all road-based public transport modes are lifted. Public transport will now be allowed to operate throughout the day. However, capacity restrictions remain. Minibus taxis remain at 70% loading capacity. Buses must adhere to a maximum loading capacity of 50%, taking due regard of standing passengers. E-hailing and meter taxis remain at 50% loading capacity. Shuttle, chauffeur, and charter services remain at 50% loading capacity.
Now, when it comes to hospitality establishments, these are places that you can go to eat for entertainment or places for accommodation such as hotels and lodges. Hotels and lodges will allow foreign nationals who were locked down. They will allow people who are traveling for work, as well as those who are going to study but perhaps need a place to stay temporarily. For those categories that are allowed to travel for now, you will be allowed to stay in an accommodation establishment. However, in terms of restaurants and eateries and places alike, they are still not allowed to welcome guests. However, you can pick up a delivery or you can order to be delivered to.
Casinos at level 3 are not yet permitted. Leisure travel, as I said, is not permitted. So inter-provincial movement will be allowed, but not for leisure. Car rentals are critical enabler of tourism and movement of people, and we are encouraged by them coming to full operation during level 3.
So be aware that once you have arrived in the province that you'll be staying in or that you'll be commuting from, you will not be allowed to travel to other provinces unless, again, it's for work or to study.
The limitation on movements across provinces and now between metropolitans and districts and hotspots may be prohibited, except for persons traveling for the purpose of starting work, moving to a new residence, or caring for an immediate family member, and also attending funerals as it has been. We will continue to limit the number of funeral attendees to 50. Those permitted to travel will be legal spouses, partners of the deceased, children and grandchildren of the deceased, whether they are biological, adopted, stepchildren, or foster children. Children, parents of the deceased, whether biological, adopted, step-parents, and foster parents, siblings, whether biological, adopted, or step-brothers and sisters, and of course, grandparents.
And finally, here are the provisions for everyday living, such as exercise.
We will lift the curfew and allow more time for exercise, walking, and cycling. However, this is permitted as long as this is not done in organized groups. In this regard, health protocols and social distancing must be strictly observed, including wearing of masks. Public training, fitness, and recreational facilities remain closed except those conducting non-contact sport matches without spectators. Workplace gatherings for work purposes will be permitted under strict conditions and in the observation of health, hygiene, and social distancing protocols. Employers must ensure that the 1.5 meter distance is maintained amongst employees. That every company must have a COVID plan and a COVID compliance officer. And that plan must be known not only by the employer, but the employees. And that plan should be available when inspectors come or anyone comes to see, and must be adhered to. And it's important because if those plans are not adhered to and COVID starts spreading in the company will have to close. So it's for the protection both of the company and of the jobs that company offers. Religious gatherings such as in places of worship will be allowed from the 1st of June, so long as health, hygiene, and social distancing is observed. This means that we must maintain 1.5 meters between the worshippers. If indeed the venue is too small to accommodate 50 people at 1.5 meters apart, it means there'll be less congregants in that venue.
And finally, those who are over 60 and those who have comorbidities or pre-existing conditions are again advised to stay away from public spaces or places where they can be exposed to COVID-19.